We all know that after creating light, God said, "Ye shall work a 5-day work week." Okay, maybe not. But doesn't it feel like the Monday through Friday 9 to 5 is the normal, never to be questioned? It turns out that the Babylonians made up the 7-day week because they could only see 7 planets. And Henry Ford, he made up the 5-day work week to sell his employees cars. So basically, our time structure is thanks to bad astronomy and the Industrial Revolution. Thanks, everyone. My next guest is here to question the way things have always been. He's the author of Thursday is the New Friday. It's the title you would expect to be a metaphor, but he literally is suggesting a different way to work. So today he's going to share why slowing down is good for our souls and society. Workplace explorer, boundary pusher, giving TGIF a whole new meaning, Joe Sanok. Thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks so much for having me here today.
The last couple of years really got us, rethinking our lives and definitely the world differently. But why should the number of days that we work be the top of our list for reconsideration? Why does that matter?
Yeah, I would start with that in 2019, we should question if that's the best that we can do as society. Is that 40-hour work week plus a bunch of side gigs, just hustling all the time? So life pre-pandemic felt really normal to us. It felt like that was solid. But if the pandemic taught us anything, it's that the things that we thought were steady, were foundational, unmovable, are absolutely movable. They're flexible, they're changeable. And if we look ahead to our next 10, 20, 30 years and really evaluate the things that are probably in front of us as the adult generation, it's kind of scary to think that we are the adults that are in charge now. Do we think that 2019 is the best we can do? Is that the most creative that we can be? Is that the most productive? And I would actually argue the neuroscience says it's not. We were stressed out, we were maxed out, we didn't come up with creative ideas. And if we're genuinely going to address these huge challenges that are ahead of our generation, we have to be our most creative, our most productive, and our most connected to one another. And I would argue that the science and case studies point to the 4-day work week as being one of the many solutions to help us do that.
So what are some of the case studies? Who's studying them and where is this happening?
Yeah, so we're seeing all across the globe 4-day work weeks being studied and implemented. The UK just announced that they'll be doing a 32-hour work week and studying that. Iceland did an enormous study of 2,500 people. They found that their productivity did not go down. Their happiness went up. Their health outcomes went up. One case study that I absolutely love because it's not the fad in community colleges to have a 4-day work week, but several years ago, this guy, Ted Forrester, he was just an HVAC instructor, so teaching heating and cooling in big buildings. For a whole summer, he went up onto the roof because he had the keys to the roof of this community college at Kalamazoo Valley Community College in Southwest Michigan. And he took pictures of an empty parking lot and just took that to the board in the fall and said, listen, every Friday in the summer, we are cooling all of these empty buildings. And if we switched to a 4-day work week just in the summer, we would actually save millions of dollars. And they said, all right, Ted, let's give this a whirl. So the next summer they did. They switched to a flexible schedule, and staff across Kalamazoo Valley Community College could work those fewer hours. And so they could come in earlier, they could stay later. They weren't working 40 hours a week, they were working 36. And they found that staff happiness went up. The amount of people that left the college went down. So then you're looking at staff turnover, and they saved millions of dollars in just air conditioning costs. So we're seeing company after company, Shopify, that's one of the most recent ones, that are switching to these 4-day work weeks. And they're seeing outcomes where their staff are as productive or more, as creative or more, and staying around in a competitive work environment. And so all around, it's like quadruple bottom line for people.
That's definitely not a hard sell for employees, and you're certainly building a strong case why it's a great benefit from like a P&L perspective for corporations. I feel like, it's 2022. We've been doing this thing for a couple of years now. I mean, with all those examples you've given me, why isn't this more common? What's the big pushback from the people and the companies that haven't embraced this?
Yeah, you talked about Henry Ford at the very beginning. I think the industrialist mindset is still very strong in quite a few mid-managers and upper managers. So what that teaches us as industrialists was that you can plug in a machine, it will be productive, it'll be reliable, that you can set it and you can forget it. That is how we've done most of society for the last 100 years or so. You look at our school systems, you look at the ways that we've run our businesses. What are the key performance indicators? Well, are people's butts in the chair for 40 hours?
Right. Yeah.
That's not a very good KPI. We weren't looking at outcomes. We weren't looking at creativity. We weren't looking at new products or sales as much as really, did you show up? Even how a lot of our laws are written, it's around time in the office, time off from the office, vacation days, maternity leaves. It's all time-based instead of outcome-based. And so there's a major shift that has to happen. And that's not easy because it's more messy. We're in that messy middle right now. In the same way that before Henry Ford, the average person was working 10 to 14 hours a day, 6 to 7 days a week. Back then, there were people that were saying, how am I supposed to have a business if I'm going from 7 days to 5 days or 6 days to 5 days, or even 12 to 14 hours a day down to 8 hours a day. And so we've done this before as humanity. We've said what we're doing isn't working for us personally. It's not working for our small societies or our communities, and it's not working for our businesses. And so because that shift is difficult, often what you see is the innovators, those businesses that have more autonomy, that have already been on the fringes of pushing limits, are the first ones to do it. Same with countries. When the leading country in the world, the United States, in so many different arenas, makes a shift, that's going to be really hard to undo. And so we see a lot of smaller countries like Iceland saying, well, let's try this with our society. And then, as we often see, there's those early adopters, there's more evidence, and then we're often late to the game in the United States, whether that's in education or pandemic rollout, or whatever. We are often late to the game and wait for things to unfold before we jump in.
I think that is probably true. I often wonder why that is, as the so-called leaders of the free world, why we are so late to the game. And I don't know, I guess you're a counselor. So from a psychological perspective, I kind of wonder if it's arrogance, if it's pride, that kind of sticks us there. I like that you mentioned upper and middle management, because when you say, even just by saying upper and middle management, you're implying a larger bureaucracy type structure to a company, which I feel like there's also a connection between the Great Resignation and this idea that you're suggesting is the next step in our evolution of work-life balance.
Yeah, I've heard Great Resignation, but I've also recently heard Great Recalibration, which I really like, because that insinuates that we haven't been doing things in line with kind of our natural neurosyncing, the way that we as individuals or as companies really need to be working. So I actually see this as, in a lot of ways, the correction, where for many years, people have been upset in their jobs. They've not wanted to go to work. They haven't liked their bosses. And so to step back and say, do I like the life that I've created for myself? Or do I need to resign from this terrible position and try to find a better place to work? To me, I think that can be a very healthy thing if we look at it. But to your question about why is it arrogance, is it pride? I would actually back up and say, let's just think about the new world 400 years ago. Who are the type of people that leave their home, leave their families, and get on a boat? They're probably the explorer types, the people that maybe have ADHD. They haven't fit into the typical box of Europe. Right. So you get this whole gene pool of people that are leaving their families and saying, let's go do something crazy. And then, 400 years later, we then see people that don't always follow the rules, that don't always, just go along with things like oftentimes Europe does. And so I think from just the genetic perspective, most likely we have some inclinations towards being a little more rambunctious. And then we look at some of the core values that we've had in this country of whether it's freedom or personal responsibility. And that's going to lead us away from thinking about the collective. And so you mix all of that together, and sometimes it's harder for us to get everyone to buy in together. I mean, I think you see that in Australia too, oftentimes, because, Australia started with a bunch of prisoners being sent off, and so you have this kind of rebellious nature when you have a gene pool of people that kind of start at a place that is going to naturally lead us to where we're at right now.
It does speak to the potential of what could happen when you say it like that. I also see an intertwining of, I use this analogy all the time in probably way too many discussions on this show, but it's not waffles, it's spaghetti. Waffles meaning here is the compartmentalized aspects of our life and society. Spaghetti meaning that's how it really is. Everything is intertwined and sticky and all over the place. And the school system, I feel like the school system is really the beginning of the setting up those future workers in that industrial mindset. And you have kids, like if you were going to make changes based on this new concept to the school system, what changes would you make?
I mean, I would start with that there would have to be different after school options. Not everyone right away is going to be able to just have their kids not be in school on a Friday. Part of just a school system is that it's childcare so that people can go do productive work. And so that's where, in some communities, the schools switch first and then companies follow. In other communities, the companies follow and then the schools take suit. And in other communities, they don't concurrently make those changes together. And so I would say if we're looking at the school system, first and foremost, looking at, are we getting what we want out of it? Are we having creative workers that are thinking differently, that can do some project-based learning, as well as, there's, whether it's the Common Core or other things, there's things that our kids absolutely need. But even just as a parent, to say, when my kids leave when they're 18 or 22 or whatever time they choose to go out into the world, they're probably going to only take a handful of life lessons out into the world. And so what are those handful of life lessons that I need to be teaching right now? Well, I have two daughters, they're 7 and 10. To me, consent is a huge thing. They own their bodies. They get to choose who touches them and how they touch them and all those things. So that means that even last night, I wanted to give my 7-year-old a hug right after dinner. She said, I don't want a hug. Now, I have to respect that if I'm going to teach consent and want that to be something that she knows. I can't guilt her into it and be like, but Daddy really wants a hug. Oh, you're so cute. No, that then sets her up in a different way, where when she's a full-grown woman, if some guy says, but you're so cute, why won't you fill in the blank? I want her to be strong enough to say, no. My whole life, my father, as a single dad, taught me that my body is my body. Get out of my life, man. And so things like that. Or, I want my girls to be able to have conversations with anybody. So sure, you need to know how to read. You need to know how to spell on a basic level. You need to know how to do some math so that you can solve problems. But what we actually need to be productive adults, unless we're engineers or, writing, things that are really complex papers, is the basics of school. But that soft skill of being able to talk to anybody, that to me is another core thing, that if they can have conversations with people that are different than them, then that's going to really set them up for success. So the other night I was hosting a bonfire, and there was people from the school there, people from the neighborhood. And one of my friends came, who I'm close with, but had never met my daughters. And I introduced him to one of my daughters, and she was about to go off and play with her friends. And I'm like, hold on a second. Like, will you ask Jay about how his week was or something interesting about his life? Like, just so they would have a micro conversation, even just a couple back and forth beyond just, hi, I'm Lucia, peace out. Like, no, I want you to learn to have conversations. And so actually the next day I had this couple over, Paul and Diane, that are some of my closest friends. And my 10-year-old moseyed up to my island in the kitchen next to Paul and said, hey, Paul, how was your week? And they sat there and chit chatted, this little 10-year-old and this 40-something-year-old guy. So they're building these skills over time. So yes, from a societal macro perspective, we want to evaluate the schools, but also as parents and individuals that interact with kids, saying, what are the values that I hope I can pass on to the next generation so that they can be better prepared to take on the future challenges?
And that truly is a recalibration. And that is a thought process that parents can have if they're not dead tired, burnt out. And so when I think about a 4-day work week, I think about the benefit to those that are in professions with the most burnout, like nurses and police officers. Certainly a 4-day work week, a hard stop on Thursday at 5 is not necessarily what you're suggesting. In your book, you talk about organisms and how they're dynamic, and use your brain, use thought process, use creativity to approach things. What do you propose a new way of working would look like for those professions like nurses and police officers?
Yeah, so what you're talking about is really the diversity of roles within our society. And so the old way of thinking, the industrialist way, is very prescriptive. It is, here's how things are supposed to work for everyone. And then you say, but that doesn't work for me. And in the past, that meant too bad. Like, you don't fit in with society, you don't fit in with business, you don't fit in with fill in the blank. The new way of thinking, I would say, is less prescriptive, less here's the 5 steps, and more of a menu-based approach. And so to say, I want to try this appetizer, and then I'm going to try this, and it's going to work for me, or it's not going to work for me. So in each business or different type of setting, we do need to look at, well, what are the needs of that particular setting? What are some tests we can do for 1 quarter? Look at some data for those 3 months and then say what worked here, what didn't work here. Now, there's going to be lots of different competing ideas. There's going to be unions. So police and nurses, they all have oftentimes competitive bargaining. And so there's going to have to be conversations. But if the nurses knew we're going to have a healthier work environment, we can work fewer hours, we can make the same amount, we can be around for our families, that's going to put pressure on upper management to do different types of hiring. It's going to also mean that maybe the quality of the hospitals or the nursing that we get as consumers may go up because we don't have stressed out nurses as much. And so looking at the big picture and realizing there will be parts that are going to be messy. There are going to be parts where there's going to be shortcomings. Can we just have no ambulance drivers on a Friday? Of course not. Like we need to have these things. So then maybe it's we do, whether it's 12-hour shifts, or we look at different ways of structuring schedules and then testing it for a period of time, getting feedback from the direct employees, but then also looking at other analytics. It's looking at the problem differently and saying, are we getting what we're paying for as consumers? When I get an ambulance, when I get a nurse, when I have a police officer, are they rested? Are they doing their job? Are they doing things that benefit society? So what am I getting out of that? What are they getting out of it? And then what are the company heads or leaders getting out of it? And being able to have those types of conversations is a different way of approaching it than maybe we have in the past.
So you're saying the change starts with the individual knowing that a different way is possible.
Yeah, I would say that the biggest takeaway is we're shifting away from a prescriptive model that the industrialists gave us into more of an experimental model where we're changing and adapting over time for the individual roles. And by roles, I don't mean each person, but for ambulance drivers, for marketing professionals, for a sales team within a company. That sales team may have a Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, because a lot of their clients maybe are relaxing on a Friday and they are able to make more sales. And over time, they realize that if we take Wednesdays off, well, that's a nice little break for us. We can kind of regroup. I can get my shopping done for my family, and then I come back and kill it for Thursday and Friday. And then for another group, it may be that we do 4 days in a row. But being able to look at the data, both qualitative and quantitative, then allows us to make different decisions within those companies rather than just we're going to find a one size fits all for all of society.
Right, because it's always been that way and that's the way we always do it. Though all those examples that you gave, those professions, they are mostly in the white collar-ish kind of department. Do you think there's a world that is waiting for us in which there isn't a 24-hour Walmart and like more of these blue collar jobs that they also get to participate? I mean, is this like a privilegey thing, or is this something that everyone can have a version of for their own lives?
I mean, I have my own ideals of what I would hope would happen. And thankfully, I'm not the only person designing this type of future for us. But it does, if we look at where is it going to be most easy for implementation, of course, it'll first start with entrepreneurs, people that have pure autonomy of their own schedules, because they already have autonomy of their schedules. And they can say, I don't want to work Fridays. I'm going to follow Joe's book for 3 months and just see what happens. Kind of the next round will be people that have more privilege, have more autonomy already, probably are higher up in the ladder, most likely salaried employees that can negotiate differently. And so round 2 would most likely be those types of people. But then it's going to force us to say, how do we want to provide for those that from an economic perspective aren't in the middle or the top, those that are hourly workers? Do we want to say we're still paying them by the hour? Do we want to say, a 40-hour work week is what their wages are based on, what a living wage is based on? Do we think that people should be able to make a living wage if they're greeting people at Walmart? And so those types of discussions, I think, are going to be individual corporations, but then also the societal pressure that's put on senators, representatives, and those that are creating the actual laws of how we look at these things.
If someone's listening to this right now and they, obviously my audience has a wide range of life situations, what is the takeaway for them to go, wow, that's a great idea. Thanks a lot, Joe. Now I've got that in my mind and I have to go back to my sucky 5-day work week schedule. What's the thing that they could possibly take away from that immediately, even if they don't have autonomy over their work schedule?
Yeah, I think one big direction is to say, how are we looking at our weekends? Because in general, our weekends are more of a reaction to the previous week rather than a preparation for the coming week. And so, we work all week, it's crazy, it's busy, and then we say, oh my gosh, I'm so tired, I'm going to sleep in, or I'm going to drink too much to just, go out with friends on Friday, and then I feel like crap on Saturday, and then, by Sunday noon, you're like, shoot, I got to go to work tomorrow. And so it's a reaction to the previous week versus we know that when we slow down, that our brains reset differently. And if we can effectively slow down, if we can effectively find those areas where we're able to genuinely let our brains relax, we'll be better prepared to do the best work in the coming week. And so you may discover through whether it's this podcast, the book, something else, that you are working for an industrialist. You may be working for someone that the biggest key performance indicator for them is how many hours you are physically in the office or physically on a Zoom meeting. That's going to tell you something about who you're working for. And that's a big thing that you have to then ask yourself is, do I want to work for an industrialist? Or could I propose to them, what, this world right now that we're in, post-pandemic, or hopefully somewhat post-pandemic, is changing, and flexible work schedules are changing. And I think that we can have as good or better outcomes with evaluating that within our company, with doing some experiments. And I'm happy to walk through what that looks like if we want to. But to be able to actually have that conversation with a boss, that's going to reveal, are you working for an industrialist or someone that wants to move into this new area? And so taking those steps reveals a lot to you in regards to what your future may look like.
And we'll definitely go through those steps in our part 2 of our discussion, where you give tips for greater efficiency and flow, helping us shake free from that industrial mindset, which I know I need help. I'm loving your book and getting so much out of it. Every, page I read, I have notes, I have to stop and take notes and really reflect. It's almost like a journal prompt full of thought experiments. So highly recommend it. If you're listening or watching to this, definitely get this book in preparation for next week's part 2 with Joe. But as we wrap up, I think I heard you say that you expect that the 4-day work week will become a reality in our generation. What do you think is the first sign that that is coming? What can we look for to go, it's here?
Yeah, I think we actually saw many of these signs emerge in the 1980s. The rise of casual Fridays, the rise of having birthday parties on Fridays, and having a celebration of someone having a baby. Fridays were half work days, and when we really look at it, Friday's been having an affair with the weekend for a long time. So let's just call it what it is.
Yeah.
So Friday's been, it's not as productive. So we already saw that, and the pandemic disrupted everything. And so for us to be able to start to see company after company and actually country after country doing this, it's pretty amazing to see. And so I would say that it's already happening in a good top 10% of the most innovative companies. And as we see that data emerge, we're only going to see it spread to larger and larger companies.
It's pretty exciting. Okay, tell them where they can find your book and keep in touch with you on socials.
Yeah. So wherever you get books, I'm sure your local bookstore would appreciate the business locally, but you can get it anywhere you find fine books. You can also go to joesanok.com. That's where we have extra reporting out of experiments that people are doing, different resources. We have our internal inclination test over there to figure out your internal inclinations, which we gave a free promo code for your podcast for that I know that you're going to be talking about. But yeah, joesanok.com or look up Joe Sanok on whatever social you're on, and I'm there.
Yes. So if you aren't already getting emails related to this show, all you have to do, if you're in the US, you can text REAL, REAL, to 66866, and you'll get my emails. That in the email, there will be a link to that inclinations test, which will just kind of give you insight into where your mindset is, because the beginning of this, right, is just bringing intention to the motivations behind why you do what you do before you change what you do. And there will be a free code to unlock that in that Saturday email. If you're outside the US, you can simply go to meredithforreal.com. That is awesome, Joe. I can't wait till part 2 when we talk about how to put these ideas to use and be more efficient.
Thank you so much for having me.
Hey, you're still here. That's awesome. I hope to see you next week too. I talk with the most interesting people that you've probably never heard of. Most of them are paradoxical and bring an opportunity for you to grow as a person. So if you like bright, meaningful entertainment, be sure to subscribe and hit the bell for notifications.